All right, we're going to switch the momentum now, and we're going to go to English. Is that okay? Yeah. Is it okay? All right, good. All right, so I want to invite to join me up here 3 amazing people that live and breathe and drink organization design for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we're going to have, because we all believe, the highest generator of energy in an organization is chaos. Did you know that? So we're going to change the program, even how we're going to conduct this panel, and we're going to start breaking rules right now. So Arnaldo, Mike, Peter, please join me up here. How about a hand for our panel? Yeah. Let's get some energy in here. Okay. So by now in the program, you've probably got a sense the world's changing quite a bit. We've got lots of information to process. Our organizations have lots of new things to deal with. Competition is really fierce. Organizations grow and die faster than they've ever done before. But what we're going to do in this segment for the next 45 minutes is talk with these 3 incredible people that we have here around what are they seeing? What is new and different? How should we think differently about designing organizations, or shouldn't we think about designing organizations any differently with what's changing in the world? So I think what I'd like to do is just start to ask the panel, and maybe you can start us off, Alberto, and tell us a little bit about, as you see you working with organizations all around the world, big, small, startups and everything, we've got all this big data, we've got all these new insights and analytics and things. As you think about organizations and design, I mean, what themes are jumping out for you that is interesting or causing trouble for people?
Let us break the program straight ahead, be provocative. I would say that organizational design is the new competitive advantage in the digital era. And I'm thinking this way because I don't believe digital transformation is all about technology. I think that was back then. Nothing is going to happen if the organization does not adapt and then does not deliver on that digital transformation. So from the very beginning, organization is a key point. Now, I do believe that an organization is set up to deliver on a business model. If the business model changes, the organization, by definition, has to change. So how we organize an organization, let me say, I don't think it happened that often in the past. We all inherited industrial design, an industrial way of organizing within that organization, and that model simply is broken. So we have a challenge, which is how we redesign the organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's a way to deliver on a precise organization for each company and business model, and most of the success of a digital transformation is going to lay on that.
Interesting. Mike, we were talking earlier today, and one of the things that I think that Alberto brings up, which is really interesting, is what should we be thinking about organization design around? Should we be thinking about designing for speed? Should we be thinking about designing for innovation, adaptability, competitive? How do you think we should think about it?
So the starting place that I keep coming back to, and I completely agree with the point that Alberto is making, the starting place that I come back to is the new model, and what is necessary now in today's world is to design for uncertainty. And the old model, and what defines that kind of dominant traditional 20th century command and control approach to organizational design, is all about designing and optimizing for certainty and predictability. And so, it starts all the way back in the early 1900s, and for decades, for the majority of the 20th century, companies could create value and get a lot of competitive advantage out of being more reliable, more predictable, more efficient. And now it is, because of how fast things change, because of the speed of technological disruption, it's impossible to predict and plan in that way anymore. So,
Mike, what does that mean, designed for uncertainty? Because
Yeah.
when I hear that, I get scared.
yeah.
Okay, like
It
that's
is
like
scary.
an oxymoron. Like, how do it's like putting a teenager in charge of the CEO office. I mean, how do you design for uncertainty?
Yeah, so if you are designing for an uncertain world, you basically, adaptability is the number one thing. You want to be able to maximize your ability to sense and respond to the changes that happen around you. So sharing information, the flow of information within your organization is very important. Teams and individuals' ability to take action and take quick action with very minimal bureaucracy is a really key component, and a sense of mission or a sense of purpose that acts as a guide in place of really strict rules and processes.
Well, hang on a second. Can I just check with the audience? Is that okay if we get rid of bureaucracy a little bit more? Is that okay with you? Do you want to keep it, do you think? Or should we, does that resonate for you? Okay, yeah, okay. That was meant to be even funnier than the actual response I got. Okay. So that's a really interesting point. And Peter, let's turn to you for a second, because you've worked for one of the most revered organizations when we think about talent strategies and we think about org design, GE. I mean, there's books written about the books written about GE and so forth. And you, I know, are dedicating your profession right now to thinking about, organization design. Take us on, your perspective in terms of how you're thinking about how these people should be thinking about organization design.
Sure. So 2 years ago, I left GE. I worked for GE for 6 years in strategy roles. So I got to see across the organization in a way that many of the folks that do a specific job don't get an opportunity to do. I now work for a think tank set up recently by the former CEO of IBM. So I'm learning a bit about the IBM world, or at least the legacy of IBM. So I have a slightly different perspective than our two other speakers here. One is I don't think the existing system is completely broken. We've done a lot to be able to optimize supply chains, for example. I mean, there's tremendous knowledge about how to run kind of the traditional organization that you spoke of. And I'm not quite sure that uncertainty is a new phenomenon. Companies have always experienced uncertainty. But I do think that the boundaries of the firm are changing. In the past, the way that you achieved size and scale was to grow bigger by creating that internal bureaucracy. And there's a very famous book called The Visible Hand by Alfred Chandler, who's a professor at Harvard, who won the Pulitzer Prize for that book. And it's all about how managers can actually be more efficient than the marketplace. And that's what 20th century firms did. They brought things inside the firm, and those managers actually had very good information to be able to allocate resources and manage things more efficiently than the external market. What the digital economy has done is actually change that. There's actually things that you can do now that it's more efficient to push back out to the market. And in fact, companies have made tremendous business models by facilitating market exchange outside of their firm. I mean, what does Airbnb and Uber do? They don't have lots of internal employees like GE. GE has 300,000 employees. IBM actually has even more. That was the traditional model because they brought things inside the firm. What's happening with the digital companies is they're pushing things outside the firm, right? And they're facilitating a market exchange. They have very small organizations. Facebook is a huge company. Google is a huge company, but in terms of market valuation, but actually the numbers of employees is quite small. But there's very interesting challenges that these firms face, which is that they've grown so fast because of these kind of network effects that they've harnessed, that they've outstripped some of that bureaucracy that helps a firm actually manage internally. And so the economists or the academics call this organizational capital. So I think for the smaller startup firms, one of the things that's really challenging is they've been so focused on the technology and the software and getting the systems right that they have actually forgotten some of the culture things that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And so now that they've gotten bigger, they're suddenly turning to that. But these organizations are stretched to the breaking point. They're small, but they're still stretched because they've grown. I mean, look at Uber. Is less than a 10-year-old company, and it has operations all over the world. And what's fascinating, and I think that people haven't quite gotten into their head, which is LinkedIn, Uber, Airbnb are all multinational corporations. They have operations in many, many, many countries around the world and are grappling with some of the challenges that some of the big companies have kind of established. And so I would say that the small companies that are growing in the digital economy have one set of challenges associated with organizational capital, how to build that internal company culture, those processes. Actually, a little bit of bureaucracy isn't a bad thing. And then the big companies are trying to figure out how to engage externally and facilitate those market exchanges outside of their firm, because they've been so focused on kind of managing internally and building all those business processes.
Yeah, I really
anyway,
like
so
that
that's
concept.
my view, is that we have to unpack it a little bit, and there's two kinds of companies, the big ones established and these other small, and they have different challenges.
Yeah, and so the point I want to reinforce, and it's pretty interesting to think about this, is that your efficiency of your organization requires you to design in how you operate with a maybe in a share economy, we'll call it, or an increasingly a share economy, how you design to be effective with other different entities and organizations, not just in other geographies, but maybe in different kinds of verticals.
Yeah, the way I think of it is ecosystems, right?
Yes.
The big companies in the past were all about linear efficiency optimization. Today, you really have to think about your ecosystem and that ecosystem that exists, you know, within your control, but a lot of it is outside of your control. And that is what's new, and I think where the uncertainty lies.
Right, right. Alberto, when you think about today, and we've got organizations moving from an old way of design to maybe potentially new ways of design. Let's say we've got people here who are wanting to go through a change. There's the world of we can build something new, and there's perhaps arguably a more challenging process of let's change where we are to where we want to be. For the people here who are in that journey of we want to change where we are to where we think we want to be, how would you recommend they approach thinking about that?
Well, first of all, I think there are different ways to face this opportunity. Different varieties of strategies. I don't think it's all about going and try to change overnight an organization, which I think it's pretty hard. You can eventually consider working with someone from the outside, whether you call that a merger, whether you call that an acquisition, whether you make a spin-off in your company and you try to make something across the street with a kind of, let's call it, different type of culture. So the mother brand, let's call it that way, they can have more time to transform. Well, you're launching a new business or learning or trying to develop new talent somewhere else. So first of all, there are different types of routes in order to tackle this opportunity, and I wouldn't say one is better than the other, as long as they make sense for the vision you want to state. So you want to understand where you want to bring your business ahead. But I would say that as a very, very basic starting point, I would try from an organizational point of view. We're not talking strictly business or value chain right now. I think I would try to answer 3 simple questions in the way where you want to be, which are in that new organization, that new way of organizing or managing that. The 3 questions to me that need to be answered is how to lead, how to work, and how to organize in that new scenario, I would say. And to me, most of the times, each of these 3 questions have a different answer to the ones we would have today. As Peter was pointing out, and he's right in this point, you don't just change everything overnight, and not everything is wrong, that needless to say, because not all industries let's say that walk at the same speed. The closer you are to the customer, to the final customer, the faster you need to go. But I would say that 3 simple questions that need to be answered, and I think it will be a very nice starting point, so how to face the future.
Great. Mike, same question to you.
Yes.
Someone's moving from where they are to where they want to be.
Yeah, well, first of all, so there are a number of kind of these tactics, strategic tactics that you can employ, like Alberto was just listing. And what I've found is that if you really are serious about it, and especially if you're a large organization that wants to make this kind of change, you do everything, and you do it in a very deliberate way. I think GE is one of the best examples out there of embracing this kind of change. I mean, GE was the iconic example of 20th century way of organizing and way of doing business under Jack Welch in the 1980s and 90s. And since then, since Jeff Immelt took over in 2000, and particularly I would say over the past 10 years, 5 years especially, they've made huge leaps in how they're changing their culture to embrace new ways of working. And they're doing all of these things. They're investing much more aggressively on the venture side of things. They're doing strategic acquisitions. They're making big pushes into completely new industries and markets like software. They're spinning out new parts of their organization and redesigning how those businesses work in their relationship with the existing business, and selling off. That's actually a really big one too. Is strategic sell-offs of business so that they can focus more deliberately on the things that really matter. And that focus on that kind of strategic focus of your business is a huge thing. GE's sell-off of the financial business, the capital business, is a very deliberate and strategic move, in part because of the regulations associated with the financial business, they were slowing down the rest of the organization from adapting in these ways.
Speaking of, looking at models of organizations that we revere, or what I call sometimes the shiny object seduction, if you will. One of the companies, and I live and work in Silicon Valley, that everyone always talks about is Netflix. And how many of you have seen the culture deck from Netflix? Okay, people on stage have, okay.
It's one of the most downloaded.
Great.
We had it prepared.
So, like I was saying, so one of the things that happened to me on my first month on the job as the head of human resources at LinkedIn is that one of my executives came and put right on my desk, hey, this is the Netflix culture deck. It's the best thing ever. You need to do, and we need to do everything that they're doing here. And Peter, I'm going to pose this one to you, because I'm sure all of you have colleagues, managers, leaders in your organization who come to you and says, oh, look what Google's doing. Everything they're doing, we need to do that here. Okay? Is there merit to that? Because I see a company that's innovating, and Google's in so many amazing businesses. Because they're so successful, should I import that culture? Should I take that design to the organization? Should I operate that way? What would you say to someone who's asking you this?
This is what I call the king of the hill phenomenon, right? When a company reaches the size and scale of a Google, it is successful, then, the business press writes about it and everybody focuses on it. And they use it, as illustrations to make points, but obviously it doesn't make sense to pick everything that Google's doing. You'd be lucky to have the resources that Google has to be able to implement, to be able to attract the best talent in the world that they can. So it's a little bit unfair, I think, to compare most organizations to Google, because they just, you're not a Google. So, but I do think that there are lessons you could learn from every organization. And so I think doing your homework is the first thing to do, which is to really, and it's hard work, right? You have to systematically look at, what are they doing right? How can I take lessons and stories that will help me drive the kind of change that I'm trying to drive in my organization? And so I think articulating that, and so using a common household name like Google can help people say and align for change, right? Because one of the hardest things is to get everybody a sense of urgency, right, to change. One thing, I could go through the litany of failures that GE has done as well over the last decade, not just all the successes, but one thing that a senior leader said in one of the training programs that I attended is that we invent ourselves every 10 years. I actually don't think that's true, but it's actually a great line because it sets yourself up for the fact that change is going to happen, and you should articulate that to your staff and to your customers, that we aren't going to sit still. We're going to constantly change, and we're going to be constantly adjusting and adapting to the marketplace. I actually got to visit Google a couple months ago, and it was a presentation by the senior legal counsel who's facing all sorts of challenges in Europe right now. He has a full plate. And he said that they wake up every day worrying about the next innovation that's coming. So even a company like Google has to worry about competitors because it's a competitive place out there, and you can't sit still.
Absolutely.
Can I build on that point?
Please.
You were talking about adapting, and you were asking me first how the organizations need to go further. And my point is sometimes we tend to think that digital transformation or organizational design is something that other people have to do. And I would say that the starting point is ourselves. And to be concrete, the way we lead ourselves, no matter, regardless of whether we have a 2,000 people team or 2 people team, I really do think that in these times, the way we lead is kind of different from the way we used to lead a few years ago. I used to work for also large companies, Procter & Gamble, Yahoo, and so on. I would have to say that I would try not to manage today the same way I used to manage 5 years ago. So the first thing I would say is, like, let's start with the man in the mirror when we talk about digital transformation. Let's understand what type of capabilities we think the new organization is going to need, and let's have faith in the fact that our management skills, in a way, we're not born with those management skills. It's something we can learn, something we can adapt and change, and I would say that digital transformation, if I may call it so, starts with ourselves, in a new way of leading ourselves as managers.
Great. So let's stay on this one, because I love this topic. And in an earlier panel that I was on today, and then in a discussion at another university earlier this week, the question comes up, well, I want to change the organization, but my executive team, they don't want to change. You know, have any of you ever faced that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
only
so to Alberto, to your point, I hear this all the time. Well, we can't. It just can't happen because the CEO or the executive team, they're just not there. They're not interested. They're not ready. What can I do? You know, how can we change? You know, Mike, what would your advice be if someone's feeling like so disempowered or frustrated?
Well, my first response is that I do generally question that assumption that whoever is at the top of the organization doesn't want to change, because what we see over and over again, we often work with people who are at the edges, close to customers, kind of in the trenches in the organization, as well as the most senior executives at the same time. And what we hear over and over again is that people at the top of the organization, they are feeling these challenges and these pressures and this need for change, and more often than not do have a desire, but also feel disempowered or feel like they can't make the organization go where they want it to go. But then so I think making a case that there is this need and building some kind of internal awareness about the challenges that everyone in the organization is facing and the pain points that everyone is facing, both external pressures and internal pressures that are getting in people's way or getting in the business's way. Talking about that and kind of building some awareness about that, and showing how much people actually have in common across functions, across business units, and across levels is a great place to start.
Yeah, I like Alberto, like you were saying, I think this whole concept of the individual, the impact an individual can make versus executive or management or leadership. You know, Peter, what are your thoughts around this whole arena of, you know, can design innovation come from below, quote unquote, or does it need to come from above, or you know, can it come from both?
Well, if you have the right skill set, you can walk, right? I mean, there's tons of opportunity, and we see actually a lot of churn in organizations. So if you don't change, people will leave. So, I mean, that creates a huge impetus to change. I think one of the things I've found is that mixed messages create, I come from the assumption that most people want to do a good job in their job. There are a few people that don't, but most people want to do a good job. They want to work hard, and they want to contribute to the organization. But the challenge is knowing what exactly to do. And so that's when the vision and the messaging of the organization becomes very critical. And as an organization becomes larger, it's hard to have that touch point with the senior managers. And so you get layers. And so sometimes that cascading of the vision that the senior leadership has, or the ability of the folks that are in the trenches communicating back up and asking questions becomes harder and harder, right? And so you can have town halls, you can have opportunities to engage your workers, but having that clarity of that vision and knowing where you're marching to, I think is part of your organizational design, because it can reduce the amount of uncertainty internally, which is, I think, detrimental to speed and agility. So when everybody's kind of aligned, and there's, I'd actually be interested in your views. There was a huge amount of press related to a New York Times article about Amazon recently and the conditions of working in Amazon. And they made it sound like it was almost like a labor camp.
Sweatshop.
A sweatshop, labor camp. And actually, I just know, I have a French friend of mine who was just up in Seattle trying to do a startup. And his view was actually Seattle is a lot more laid back than Silicon Valley, that people actually have to work even harder. So this notion that you're just coming to work and hanging out, playing ping pong and just coming up with an idea or two. And no, these people are working really hard.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty intense work environment that we see there.
So let's continue this thread, because I think this is interesting. So we're talking around, okay, how we communicate, how change can happen from lots of different angles. With the yammers of the new social media tools that we have, internal discussion boards, it's the digital innovation that's out there right now. Alberto, are you seeing organizations leverage those to be able to pass through, cascade messages better, more effectively as they're going about these? Is that changing, or is it still, no, we need face-to-face?
Okay, my perspective is you need these kind of tools to make transformation happen. The fact that you have these tools does not make transformation happen by itself. In other words, the tools are a strategy nor an objective. Just by throwing Yammer or Slack in an organization, it doesn't happen overnight. So what I'm picking up is certainly you need a purpose and a vision and a direction for this movement. And it has to come from the top down, that's for sure. But you don't change an organization just by having inspiration or by drawing beautiful PowerPoint presentation. You need something else. You need something else. And in this sense, these tools, among others, I think are a must if you want to get, for example, into transparency and speed when you need to operate much faster in a more adaptable way. So that's it.
Yeah.
So that's it.
These tools are really interesting, and going back to the point about how does bottom-up happen, what we've started to see, and it's really kind of cool and exciting to us, is that there's a lot of anecdotal examples that we're starting to see of people basically going out on their own. Slack is a really good example when it comes to software. There are lots of individuals in all kinds of Fortune 500 companies who will remain nameless for their sake.
Come on,
for the moment.
Turn off the camera for a second.
Big Fortune 500 companies, individuals who are just installing and using Slack because it's such a great tool, because they find it so useful among their team. And they're circumventing IT and the IT concerns, the corporate IT concerns about Slack because it's so useful. And only after thousands of people in the organization are already starting to use it, then corporate IT comes along and says, I guess we have to let them use it. And then they go to Slack, and Slack's ready for this. Slack's saying, yes, we're rolling out an enterprise version that has increased security standards. So that's already happening. And then also on the more organizational and organizational technology front, there are groups more and more coming up who are saying, we've heard about something like Holacracy, which is this self-management system, and other related kind of organizational tools. where groups or teams are just using it and adopting it without the sanction of anyone inside. And something like holacracy is particularly interesting because it's a way of managing. It's kind of inherently viral. Like, as soon as it touches another team or another part of the organization, if they're not playing in the same way, then it doesn't work. So, and it's naturally useful. So when let's say the IT function is operating this way, and then they start working on a project with the marketing team. Marketing is not working this way yet. Marketing starts adopting these new practices, and then it spreads to the marketing team because it's so useful. And that's already starting to happen.
That's cool. So we've got about 15 more minutes of the session here. I want to just ask you guys one more question, and then I'd like to have you start thinking about a question that you'd like to ask any of us up here that's of interest to you. So plant the seed, start thinking about something, because there's so many things that we could talk about. But I would like each of you guys to give me an example. You know, we could do sort of like, we could pick lots of different things of maybe a technology, a new digital technology that you find and you've seen in an organization, to the extent that you can share it, is actually driving an organizational change difference that didn't exist maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Easy answer on a basic one. Just using Dropbox, Evernote is a big change. I would like to ask the audience, I'm not going to ask the audience, how many of you...
Are you a shareholder?
How many, I'm not, unfortunately. Picking up on Mike's point, sounds like a very easy thing to do. Oh, let's use Evernote and Dropbox. How many IT departments would not let you do that? Okay, so that's a big thing. So just by Dropbox, Evernote, Slack, I would think Slack, that would be like, whoa. Okay, that would be, and I've seen big changes in the way how to work, how to organize, how to lead. I've seen these basic tools make a real change in organizations.
Right. And as a pause, while you guys think about your example, buying you guys time, one of the things that I've found completely breaks the belief that an organization is going to change its design is when something happens that you just talked about, Alberto. You say, we're going to change everything, and we want to listen to you, the employees, and tell us what you want. And someone says, well, we want to implement Slack. And then the answer is, no, sorry, can't do that. And then you've just killed it. You've just really, poured water all over what could be a really interesting plan. I'm not saying there's not security risks, but lawyers are there to give advice, not to always lay down the rules. And sometimes it's good to break the rules and be a little revolutionary to drive some change. But other technologies, digitalization that you're seeing in companies that you think are interesting?
Yeah, so I'd love to share one of my favorite stories is a GE example of some work that my company did with GE a couple years ago. Ties a lot of different things together. So we were working on GE's strategy around digital fabrication technology, 3D printing, that kind of thing. How it's changing, this is about 3 years ago now. So how is that technology changing? What does it mean for the future of manufacturing for GE? One of the interesting things about that technology is that as basically hardware engineering starts working a lot more like software engineering in that it gets distributed, it becomes more open, it allows more engineers to contribute to the design of a hardware product, regardless of where they are or whether they're inside the organization or outside the organization. So in order to kind of play with that, to test that a little bit, we created an external challenge together with a website called GrabCAD, which is basically a platform, a community platform for engineers all over the world to share engineering designs for anything. And we challenged them to create a new and improved design for a bracket that goes inside of a GE jet engine that would be used using 3D printing technology. And they had over 700 submissions from people all over the world. Some, professional engineers, some amateurs, some who had experience with aviation engineering, some who didn't. On average, they saw a huge reduction in the weight of the part, which is very significant in the aviation business. And the winner had over an 80% weight reduction in the part and was a kid from Indonesia who had never done any kind of aviation engineering before.
Wow. Love
And
that
it
story.
really changed their mental model about who and how can participate in the
I just
the
wanted
design
a
of their
simple
products.
example, Mike. You just went way up there. Man. You crushed it. Crushed it.
Well, I mean, I did something similar in GE. I ran a crowdsourcing event. I had 5,000 engineers participate. Some of the ideas came from other business units that we weren't expecting. But we did it. It was considered successful, and then they never repeated it again. So there are those examples. I want to give an example more narrowly focused on strategy. Because I think that there's some very interesting things that are happening with the ability to go out and grab lots of information from news sources. Most news organizations now expose their APIs or other information that you can go out and grab. So I've gotten extremely interested in this space of, I guess you would call it automated data mining. Particularly for news services, and I think that's going to change the strategy function. In the past, you had to have a larger marketing team, or you had to have more people to go through and read everything that's happening, and now you can automate that. And I think that technologies like Watson are going to move into this space. There's a little company out of San Francisco that I like called Quid that does analysis. I can crunch through 10,000 articles in about 10 minutes. And be able to understand generally what's going on, and then I can drill into the specific articles.
Wow,
so
fantastic.
kind of automated research for strategy and in what they call environmental scanning, I think is a really interesting space.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. Okay, who's got a question or a thought-provoking concept? Yes?
Thank you guys, it's been super interesting. So you have mentioned different technologies and how they impact on organizations and stuff. But I'm curious on your take on new ways in which people are increasingly working, like remote work, more freelancing is a bit of a generational thing as well. Maybe we are not seeing that much yet in Spain, but it's here to come for sure. So how do you feel about that, and how we merge those new trends with traditional way of working?
Yeah. So this is the freelance economy, and there's a bunch of small companies from Fiverr to TaskRabbit to Upwork that are now creating these workplace platforms that you can go out and attract. And what's interesting is that they actually haven't scaled very large. There are no unicorn workplace platforms out there yet, which is interesting. And I think that what has to happen is that large existing enterprises have to figure out how to embrace those platforms. And when that happens, I think that these things will scale. So they're very interesting. I think they're probably the most experience has been in the United States right now, but they're growing. And what they do is that they allow you to tap resources across borders in a way that you couldn't do before. So they're quite disruptive for labor law. So there's lots of regulatory issues that are going to be faced.
Felipe, you in here? No? Okay. Come see me after, because there's a jobs and talent company CEO here who's working on what you're talking about that you need to talk to. Okay? Another question. In the back. That's you. Yeah? Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so about the new roles that are creating in the C-suite, right? So there's the Chief Digital Officer to take care of digital, there's the Chief Analytics Officer to take care of analytics, of course the Marketing Officer, Technology Officer to take care of security, and Revenue Officer to manage omnichannel, et cetera, et cetera. So is the space for everyone there?
Right.
And also you have the incumbents, right? That they own all the P&Ls and the CEO, right? And it's a team job, right? So how do you see all this disruption at that level happening? And I know there's no one size fits all, but your comments are...
I would say that, of course, there's not a simple answer. My point on this would be that just by the fact that you appoint a chief digital officer does not make your company digital, does not mean that you transform the company. Sounds like a joke. I've seen too many. I've seen too many of these. So I love processes in order to change organizations. I don't believe that much in PowerPoint. I see Chief Digital Officer as eventually good process to turn this dynamic that helps the company, for example, to become a more of a learning organization, because all the learnings and all the things that happen around can just get inside the organization. But by no means, I think, for example, a C-suite is the solution. It could be one of the many strategies, could be temporary. I don't know. The answer to that is, I don't know. But I would not put that as a must into this process. That would be my
I
answer.
totally agree with Alberto. That's the biggest mistake I see people do, is say, we're going to transform the company, chief transformation officer, right? Boom. And so then I can put in the board slide when I see the board next month that I'm working on this transformation, right? And then my lack of ownership goes over to that person, and now they're accountable. And that's one of the things I see.
Yeah, I completely agree that you can't just have name a new C-suite position and be done with it. But I do think that leadership all the way at that level of the organization to solving these kinds of issues is very important. And one of the things that I'm starting to see is that there's a new role for the HR function, and some of the best and I think most innovative HR leaders among corporations right now are thinking about these problems and are trying to tackle them as part of their work. So I think somewhere I'm starting to see between whoever is senior most owning the kind of innovation agenda and owning the people agenda where those two agendas overlap tends to be where this lives.
Right.
Last comment, then we gotta
close. So
make it really powerful.
Yeah. So one of the challenges that are faced is that these new digital technologies require specific skill sets, like in R and in programming and things like that. The traditional functions don't necessarily have that. So one of the areas that's really interesting is chief economists suddenly don't have these skill sets. Vice versa, the computer scientists don't have the expertise in economics or in marketing. And so I think companies are trying to grapple with the fact that these new digital tools require a whole new set of skills, but those folks know one thing, and then how do you blend this? So I think it's this blending process, and once in a while you can find that amazing person that has all these capabilities, but really it's a joint function. So I think the question really to me is, what is the future team that a CEO is going to assemble? Was that powerful enough?
Yes, that was awesome. I want to thank our panel. We've got Mike and Peter flew over for the States just to be here. I hope this is not the end of the conversation. We're going to be outside around all of us, Alberto.
And treating.
Yes, and so thank you very much for staying with us for this past 45 minutes, and a big hand for the panel. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to switch the momentum now, and we're going to go to English. Is that okay? Yeah. It's okay? All right, good. All right, so I want to invite to join me up here 3 amazing people that live and breathe and drink organization design for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we're going to have, because we all believe, the highest generator of energy in an organization is chaos. Did you know that? So we're going to change the program, even how we're going to conduct this panel, and we're going to start breaking rules right now. So Arnaldo, Mike, Peter, please join me up here. How about a hand for our panel? Yeah. Let's get some energy in here. Okay. So by now in the program, you've probably got a sense the world's changing quite a bit. We've got lots of information to process. Our organizations have lots of new things to deal with. Competition is really fierce. Organizations grow and die faster than they've ever done before. But what we're going to do in this segment for the next 45 minutes is talk with these 3 incredible people that we have here around what are they seeing? What is new and different? How should we think differently about designing organizations, or shouldn't we think about designing organizations any differently with what's changing in the world? So I think what I'd like to do is just start to ask the panel, and maybe you can start us off, Alberto, and tell us a little bit about, as you see you working with organizations all around the world, big, small, startups and everything, we've got all this big data, we've got all these new insights and analytics and things. As you think about organizations and design, I mean, what themes are jumping out for you that is interesting or causing trouble for people?
let us break the program straight ahead, be provocative. I would say that organizational design is the new competitive advantage in the digital era. And I'm thinking this way because I don't believe digital transformation is all about technology. I think that was back then.
For the majority of the 20th century, companies could create value and get a lot of competitive advantage out of being more reliable, more predictable, more efficient. And now it is, because of how fast things change, because of the speed of technological disruption, it's impossible to predict and plan in that way anymore. So,
Mike, what does that mean, design for uncertainty? Because
Yeah.
when I hear that, I get scared.
yeah.
Okay, like
It
that's
is
like
scary.
an oxymoron. Like, how do it's like putting a teenager in charge of the CEO office. I mean, how do you design for uncertainty?
Yeah, so if you are designing for an uncertain world, you basically, adaptability is the number one thing. You want to be able to maximize your ability to sense and respond to the changes that happen around you. So sharing information, the flow of information within your organization is very important. Teams and individuals' ability to take action and take...
Nothing is going to happen if the organization does not adapt and then does not deliver on that digital transformation. So from the very beginning, organization is a key point. Now, I do believe that an organization is set up to deliver on a business model. If the business model changes, the organization, by definition, has to change. So how we organize an organization, let me say, I don't think it happened that often in the past. We all inherited industrial design, an industrial way of organizing within that organization, and that model simply is broken. So we have a challenge, which is how we redesign the organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's a way to deliver on a precise organization for each company and business model, and most of the success of a digital transformation is going to lay on that.
Interesting. You know, Mike, we were talking earlier today, and one of the things that I think that Alberto brings up, which is really interesting, is what should we be thinking about organization design around? Should we be thinking about designing for speed? Should we be thinking about designing for innovation, adaptability, competitive? How do you think we should think about it?
So the starting place that I keep coming back to, and I completely agree with the point that Alberto is making, the starting place that I come back to is the new model, and what is necessary now in today's world is to design for uncertainty. And the old model, and what defines that kind of dominant traditional 20th century command and control approach to organizational design, is all about designing and optimizing for certainty and predictability. And so, you know, it starts all the way back in the early 1900s, and for decades,